Welcome to Politics Nation. I'm Al Sharpton. Tonight in Los Angeles, we start tonight with breaking news. President Obama's historic announcement about gay rights in this country. The president says he now fully supports marriage for same-sex couples. The first time ever a sitting president has made a commitment to this basic civil right.
I had hesitated on gay marriage, in part because I thought civil unions would be sufficient, that was something that would give people hospital visitation rights and other elements that we take for granted. And I was sensitive to the fact that for a lot of people, the word marriage was something that evokes very powerful traditions, religious beliefs, and so forth. But I have to tell you that over the course of several years, as I talk to friends and family and neighbors, when I think about members of my own staff who are in incredibly committed monogamous relationships, same-sex relationships, who are raising kids together, when I think about those soldiers or airmen or Marines or sailors who are out there fighting on my behalf and yet feel constrained, even now that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is gone, because they're not able to commit themselves in a marriage. At a certain point, I've just concluded that for me personally, it is important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
This announcement comes just 3 days after Vice President Biden said he was comfortable with same-sex marriage.
I am absolutely comfortable with the fact that men marrying men, women marrying women, and heterosexual men and women marrying men are entitled to the same exact rights, all the civil rights, all the civil liberties. And quite frankly, I don't see much of a distinction.
We've had signs for months now that there might be a shift on this issue from the White House. After supporting civil unions but not gay marriage, the president said in December of 2010 that his views were evolving. The public has been wrestling with this issue as well, and attitudes have been changing. Polls show steadily rising support for same-sex marriage over the last decade. In fact, a new Gallup poll now shows 50% of Americans now support the right of same-sex couples to marry. This includes majorities of young people, Democrats, moderates, independents, college grads, women, and Catholics. Clear majorities of all these groups now support same-sex marriage. The American people are changing on this, moving towards acceptance of these basic civil rights. But not Mitt Romney. Here's what he said today.
I think people have differing views on marriage, and I respect people's different views. When I served as governor of my state, this issue arose, same-sex marriage and civil union. I pointed out that I'm in favor of traditional marriage between a man and a woman, and I don't favor civil union or gay marriage.
For many of us, this is about people's rights, people having the same civil and human rights. This is not about personal religious choice, and we must underscore that on such a historic day as today. Joining me now is Melissa Harris Perry, host of MSNBC's Melissa Harris Perry, and Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. Thanks to you both for joining me tonight. Jonathan, this is big news. What's your reaction to this?
It's not only big news, Rev, it's historic news. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, the President of the United States, for the first time, expressed support for same-sex couples being able to get married. Now, as President of the United States, all he can say is that he supports this. In order for the so-called Defense of Marriage Act to be overturned, a law from Congress would have to hit the President's desk, and he would have to sign sign it. There is one from Senator Dianne Feinstein of California. Another way that DOMA could be overturned is by a court challenge, and there are a number of court cases percolating their way up to the Supreme Court. But the fact that the president came out in favor of marriage equality today, as I said, is not only big news, it's historic news, and it was the right thing to do.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that it clearly was the right thing to do. But Melissa, aside from the law, this is a real victory for civil rights and civil liberties, even beyond just those in the gay and lesbian community. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I know a lot of folks are going to kind of look at the politics around this, and they're going to trace this moment back to Vice President Biden saying that he was totally comfortable with marriage equality while on Meet the Press. But I have to say, I actually think that an awful lot of this decision on the part of the president to speak out on this today has to do with that North Carolina Amendment 1 vote yesterday. I've heard the coverage throughout the day today, and people sort of keep saying, well, people in North Carolina, voters in North Carolina voted for a same-sex marriage ban, but that is not what happened in North Carolina. Same-sex marriage, of course, was already banned in North Carolina. Yeah. What happened was a kind of extremism that pushed beyond any sort of reasonable understanding of what civil and equal rights and first-class citizenship should look like. And
it even affected those that were not talking about same-sex marriage.
Absolutely. And so part of what I hear in the president's decision today is, as Jonathan just said, it's not a legislative decision. It's not a policy decision. It's about getting out in front on a fundamental ethical position about the question of first-class citizenship for all Americans, and putting his voice on the historic record in this moment and saying, I will not be part of that group of voices that are calling for some people, simply because of their identity, to be relegated to a constant position of second-class citizenship. So I agree. I hate that it happened just in an interview. I sort of would have loved to have heard this in the well of Congress, in the way that we heard
you may, I'm sure, hear
talk
more
about "We shall overcome." But I'm happy to hear it, no matter how it happens.
I think you'll probably hear more proclamations. But you agree it's historic for a sitting president to say this?
Absolutely.
Jonathan, let me bring another angle here that when Melissa talks about the politics, but I think there's one political side that a lot of people are going to miss, and that is the courage of this. President Obama politically was way ahead of his opponent in the gay and lesbian community. This is a stand that he really didn't have to take in order to get votes in that community. So I would question, isn't this an example of him taking a stand that politically shows some courage that he did not have to demonstrate just to get votes? He was way ahead in that community already.
Right, he was way ahead in the LGBT community. This is an issue that, if you read a lot of the stories in the Washington Post and New York Times, everywhere, talking about the political peril that faced the president in swing states and among swing voters if he were to do so. But the other thing, I think Mark Halperin said earlier today, that actually this might inure to the president's benefit, in that if the Republicans try to go after the president for his public stance on same-sex marriage, supporting it, that it would then shift the conversation away from the economy and onto social issues, which, as we have seen during the Republican primary process, doesn't help Republicans all that well, and it shifts the conversation away from the economy. The president is in the right on this issue, and if the Republicans, and Mitt Romney in particular, the presumptive Republican nominee, want to have that conversation on social issues, and particularly on marriage equality, I think the White House and the president would be more than happy to have it.
Now, Melissa, will this become an attempt by the Republicans to use this as a wedge issue? Because we know, I remember in 2004 when I was running and came out for same-sex marriage, they had, even in the black church, a lot of people denouncing it. Will they try to do this across the board and use this as a wedge issue to get all kinds of people, and particularly those in the right-wing Christian community, to come out and try to drive out a vote against the president?
Of course. I mean, they're going to use the fact that it's Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday in order to attempt to drive a wedge and keep the president from being reelected. But I think that goes to 2 points. One, as Jonathan just said, they actually have been failing on their attempts to revive social issues as a basis for kind of a broad coalition building. All that it enables him to do is kind of drill deeper in those deep red states where people are willing to restrict contraception, restrict the basic fundamental civil rights of gay and lesbian Americans. It's not, I think, going to work in these big swing states where median voters really want to know whether or not they're going to have work, whether or not they're going to have security in their homes, whether or not their kids are going to be able to go to college. But I think, particularly on the question of race, I think this is in part why this issue is so courageous, or this stance is so courageous for the president, because part of what he said here is, I had these conversations with Michelle and with Sasha and Malia, that these African American women who are his beloved family members helped to guide him to this position. But also he talked quite specifically about his faith and talked about what it meant to be a Christian who understood both the golden rule as well as the idea of a God who, as you and I have talked about, Reverend Sharpton, a God who actually sees sort of all of humanity as part of the narrative and the story of the human and the divine experience. And so I actually think it was quite bold of the president to go right at that issue of religion.
Very much courageous, and also, as we've talked about, a selective reading of the Bible. But Jonathan, I think that the real question is, if you look at the fact that there are 6 states that gay marriage is legal now, plus the District of Columbia, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Iowa, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, and Washington, 30 states with constitutional bans on same-sex marriage, there's going to be this is going to energize a battle, but it seems as though the Democrats was moving that way and moving the way the general American public has changed and grown on this issue. Not only Vice President Biden's statement, but former President Clinton did a robocall in North Carolina opposing the ban on same-sex marriage. And when we look at the fact, though, that in North Carolina, voters banned same-sex marriage and civil unions 61-39, and people came out in unprecedented numbers yesterday. This is a hot issue. The president, I think, gets a lot of credit for courage, but let's not make a mistake about this. This is going to be a hot issue in this campaign.
Right, it's going to be a hot issue in this campaign, Rev, but there's something else to keep in mind. With the president's declaration, and also with Vice President Biden's declaration on Meet the Press on Saturday, what you're seeing is we have now seen the last Democrat to not be in favor of marriage equality. When the folks go to run in 2016, 2 of the leading candidates are Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York and Governor Martin O'Malley of Maryland, both of whom are in favor of marriage equality. And as you said, in New York State, same-sex marriage is legal there, due in large part, or most part, to the active efforts of Governor Cuomo to get it done within the first 6 months of his being elected governor. So what we're seeing here, yes, is a political hot potato in 2012, but what we're seeing is an incredible political shift away from having civil unions be the acceptable minimum that you could say you were for to show that you were in favor of gay rights, to now, if you're a Democrat in particular, you must be in favor of marriage equality if you want to be on the national stage.
Melissa Harris Perry and Jonathan Capehart, thank you both for your time tonight.